If you haven't seen part 1, that contains 50 through 26, so I would recommend watching that first, just so you can get an idea of what the rest of the top 50 looks like before we get into the meat, the best stuff. These are my 25 favorites. Let's just jump right in with number 25, Climax. This was a really, really interesting experience. It's essentially a drug trip movie. It's colorful, bright, chaotic, and just has this energy about it that I haven't really seen captured quite the same way in anything else. I really want to get into Noé and his other works, especially Irreversible and Enter the Void. If you enjoy kind of that psychedelic horror, this will be for you. At 24, we have one of my favorite on-screen depictions of a psychopath in Lars von Trier's The House That Jack Built. You have to go in with the expectation that it will make you laugh as much as it will scare you. Matt Dillon's performance here is off the charts. I absolutely love him in this, and that's saying a lot because he's an actor who can be kind of hit or miss for me. I think it's kind of like an allegory for Lars's career as a whole, and that's something I could dive more into if I did like a deeper analysis of it. But I'll just say for now that it's one of my favorite movies of his, though not the last one to come up on this list. At 23, I've got the Swedish horror film, Let the Right One In. It's kind of more so a story about young love, young friendship, loneliness, and belonging between these two children. One who evidently is a vampire, something that we come to discover gradually throughout the film. Going into this, if you don't know what it's about, you might not even know that it's a horror film at all. But it does slowly delve into the more supernatural, horrific elements of it. And it's able to balance that really, really well with the surface level melodrama. Vampires have often been used as allegories for, trauma, sexuality. This one kind of explores similar themes, but especially just more innocently, like loneliness itself. At 21 and 22, we have Robert Eggers' The Witch and The Lighthouse. I will say when I first watched The Witch, I was less blown away by it than I have been on several rewatches. The thing that really has stuck with me is the feeling of authenticity that these carry. No one quite writes dialogue like Robert Eggers. It feels very much grounded in its time and in the time he's trying to depict. And outside of that, he has a real eye for cinematography. And in terms of horror, I think, especially with The Witch, he's able to do a lot of fun stuff with some classic, metaphors, like the goat, Satanism. And then with The Lighthouse, he captures this kind of fun, comedic angle almost. A lot of fart jokes, surprisingly. At 19 and 20, I have back-to-back David Cronenberg movies with The Fly and Videodrome. The Fly, kind of an adaptation of Kafka's Metamorphosis in terms of, that intrinsic horror that exists with, losing your humanity as such. I think The Fly has that classic sensibility. It just feels like one of the essential works in the horror genre, and I think it does for a reason. And then with Videodrome, a unique, perhaps even ahead of its time concept. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a really bad remake of this soon with what it speaks to in terms of how we can often become seduced by what we see on the television and the monster that, media itself can be at times. At 18, we have Ridley Scott's Alien. I absolutely love movies that utilize that enclosed setting with a monster where we have our baseline crew that are getting knocked off one at a time by a force that's, often engulfed in shadow and slowly reveals itself. Speaking of monster films that are contained within small enclosed spaces, at number 17 we have John Carpenter's The Thing. This is some of the best practical effects work I think we've ever seen in film. That's kind of like John Carpenter's specialty, but perhaps never greater than in this movie. At number 16 we have Brian De Palma's Phantom of the Paradise. I think this is my favorite musical of all time. I'm not typically the biggest fan of musicals because I find that they can often border into corniness in a way that this somehow manages not to. I mean, it's obviously a very, very campy movie, as I've said with Carrie and as I've said with many Brian De Palma movies, but it does that in a way that elevates instead of, pulls me out of the film. I absolutely love the costume design. I love the concept of a story within a story within a story, as well as the kind of aesthetic in general of the film, which I think has gone on to influence a ton of Eastern media, especially, that I'm a big fan of, in particular Berserk. At 15, we have David Lynch's Eraserhead. This is uniquely eerie. Leave it to David Lynch to capture something that is really just terrifying within its presentation itself. The fact that the main conceit of the film is the fear of becoming a father and of having children. What a terrifying looking baby fetus. Really captured the post-nuclear era fears regarding, radiation and deformity. At 14, we have Michael Haneke's Funny Games. This is a frustrating movie, which might be a weird way to describe a film that I've put this high on the list, but the point of it, I think, is to be frustrating. Watching, our protagonists finally get a foot up on some home invaders, some antagonists who have been just an unstoppable force, and then seeing them twist the very rules and fabric of the universe itself. It's so annoying and brilliant at the same time. If you haven't seen the movie, you might not know what I'm talking about, but in that case, I just recommend watching it so you understand. At 13, we have what is, I believe, the newest film on the list, with The Substance. Just one of the best kind of body horror concepts I've seen in a while. It tackles beauty standards and industry standards within Hollywood. It utilizes some visual elements and story beats that make it kind of the penultimate depiction of that topic on screen. The third act of this movie is one that will either have you loving the film or maybe have you hating it. It's very chaotic and it goes right off the rails. I loved the way this movie ended, and if you like big chaotic flourishes, then this might be for you. At 12, we have the Japanese detective thriller The Cure. This is sort of a Seven-esque police procedural that follows a slew of different killings, all with the pattern that they are suicides. But of course, our protagonist is not convinced that they aren't related, and if you enjoy police procedurals or supernatural voodoo concepts, such as what we saw recently in Weapons, for example, you will enjoy this. I think it's a really good watch. At number 11, we have another Japanese film, Audition, which I'd love to tell you is just a romantic comedy, and watch your horror slowly unfold as you get into the second and then the third act of this film. It's quite entertaining for the fact that it really does begin on such innocent, naive grounds and devolves into something truly scary. It's a lot of fun too, though. At number 10, we have what I think is the greatest vampire film of all time, Park Chan-wook's Thirst. This is kind of about a priest who ends up becoming a vampire of sorts, without revealing too much. It's campy in a really fun way, but also really utilizes the vampire metaphor to its greatest effect. At number 9, we have Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. This is obviously a classic that's been analyzed to death, so I won't spend too much time on it, but Jack Nicholson absolutely knocks it out of the park. Shelley Duvall is phenomenal in this, and of course it gives us one of the most frightening things of all time, which is a naked old woman. Few things are scarier than that. Kubrick really delves into his horror sensibilities here. It's not my favorite of his films, but it is, I think, his most surreal, perhaps. At number 8, we have Rosemary's Baby, directed by Roman Polanski, and this gives us a unique take on the classic cult film. Mia Farrow gives us an absolutely harrowing performance in this as a woman whose descent into chaos is directly related to her being, essayed by the devil himself, and not being able to explain that experience or have it validated by even her own husband. And that ending, I think, is unparalleled. At number 7, we have another film that I watched for the very first time this year, which is The Vanishing. And without giving too much away, this is essentially a film about a couple who go on vacation in the French Alps, and this man watches his wife go to the convenience store and never return. and becomes obsessed with her disappearance for 3 whole years. Finally, at the end, we get the odd conceit, the big question, where facing his wife's killer, the man has the option to either experience the same thing and discover what happened to her, or go on with his life not knowing. One of the best twist endings I've ever seen in a horror film. At number 5 and number 6, we have 2 more David Cronenberg movies with Dead Ringers and The Brood. I think these both capture his unique psychological as well as body horror sensibilities. What I will say is David Cronenberg is one of those directors that I feel like I really connect to in terms of what makes something scary and what makes a really interesting allegory for trauma, for identity, for persona, depending on which one of these films you're talking about. At number 4, we have David Lynch's Inland Empire. And this is a unique descent into madness. Almost 3 hours long, the last film in his LA Hollywood trilogy. Anyone who's seen the movie knows that it is ugly, maybe would be the best word to describe it, but that kind of makes it all the eerier. I think this is probably the scariest movie on this entire list. I've tried to kind of analyze it as much as I could, which I've left on my Letterboxd. At number 3 on the list, we have Under the Skin by Jonathan Glazer. Obviously, the fun fact that people love to bring up about Jonathan Glazer's Under the Skin is that Scarlett Johansson was communicating with real people in lots of these scenes. So we're seeing the integration of real life footage of real civilians interacting with this actress playing an alien within the human skin. I actually listen to the score for this kind of all the time. It's composed by Mika Levy. At number 2, we have Lars von Trier's Antichrist. My brother is also a big fan of this one, and I remember he told me that his interpretation of this kind of like breakup story is that Willem Dafoe and Charlotte Gainsbourg kind of represent 2 sides of the same person, and the conflict that occurs when one is tackling depression. And I think that's the best interpretation you can have going into this. It really tackles like the grief and despair and pain that comes along with, losing a loved one. There are some moments that I still have a hard time looking at. If you've seen the film, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Some real, head turners. At number 1, my favorite horror movie, top of the list, I had to go with Possession from 1981. Also a breakup film, but one that utilizes hyper emotive acting in a really fun way. Everything about this movie feels like excessive, including the sets. It's kind of both funny and horrific at the same time. If I tell you that this is a monster movie akin to Shape of Water in some ways too, you might have no idea what I'm talking about throughout the first 30 minutes of it, but you'll see. It's something unique. It's of its own, and it's of its own in a way that I absolutely love. I adore it. So that's my top 50 horror films of all time. I hope you enjoyed the list. I hope you watched some of these. They won't be for everyone, but they are my favorites, and I try to stay true and honest to what I enjoy. So if you have any horror films that you'd like to recommend to me in the comment section, or you want to leave your own list, please do. I love to read it. So yeah, thank you everyone for watching, and I will see you next time.